start. Recording started. Yeah. So, hello everybody. Welcome to the new Nordic-RSE seminar series session. Today our speaker is Richard Darst from Alto Scientific Computing Group, and he will talk about what is an RSE group, why it's important to exist, how to make it exist, and related matters. And if you're here for the first time, you can see on the screen on the HackMD, whose link I'm now pasting in the chat, information about Nordic-RSE and the Nordic-RSE seminar series. So Nordic-RSE is this organization to bring together RSEs in the Nordics and support them. And if you don't know what an RSE is, today's talk is perfect for you. And we registered the last fall, and you can find in the HackMD on the website information about how to register if you want to join. The seminar series is one activity that we have to support such cause of supporting RSEs, which aims at having talks that are interesting for people interested in RSEs. So if you have some ideas, it's probably very likely to be a very great talk, and you're welcome to chat in the RSE Code Refinery Zulip chat or open an issue in the GitHub. So, Richard, I think the floor is yours now, if you want to.
Okay, thanks.
Continue on this.
How about we start with this icebreaker question? So does everyone have HackMD open? So let's see what people say. So I'm actually not going too much into the detailed definition of what is an RSE, but some sort of definition like that will spontaneously come out, I think, during this talk, or at least you will be motivated about what my definition is. Let's see. Research super engineer, that's interesting. That's somewhat related to what I would be saying. Lucky for you, I have cat problems right now. Okay, but this relates to the title of the talk, as you see here, Motivating Specialist Services in Universities. Because as I've been working on RSE stuff for a while, I basically separated the, what do I call it? So to the people that would fund research software engineering groups, the software is sort of the least interesting part of it. Maybe not least interesting, but one of the hardest to motivate. Thus the need to expand the definition to a, yeah. Okay, so this is an interesting one, an organizational level above the research group that supports multiple research groups, implying that an RSE is not in a single group. Well, let's see what we get. Why does my cursor not scroll the window? Okay, so about me. My formal job title is staff scientist at Alto University in Finland. And I was one of the people that started the Alto-RSE service. And this was, well, the difficult part is sort of motivating the role of it in the university. And it was really interesting to hear all the different perspectives I would get. People who would say, oh, this sounds interesting, and people who would say, well, isn't that what people already do? And everywhere in between. Okay, so my abstracting thing is what I basically just said. So should we go about what is an RSE sum? Let's see what this blog post does. Is the cat too distracting?
Yeah, we cannot hear you when it has the mic. We can hear the cat very well.
Okay, I'll try to keep it down. Okay, so, okay, it's going out. Let's say how long it takes to open a door. So in this, in this thing, we, at the Nordic-RSE unconference last year, we took RSE and subtracted each of the letters to see what was left. So remove research and you get a software engineer, which is sort of like clearly a much different thing. If you remove engineer, you get a research software person, something that does things with research software, which to me is maybe the second furthest from what it is. But when you remove software, you end up with research engineer. And this starts seeming pretty similar. So what would a research engineer do in, say, a school of chemistry or chemical engineering? So they would be someone that's sort of going between the science and then the practical matters and dealing with the, like, well, supporting the research. Of course, that's when you exclude the idea of the engineer that's like you're training someone to be an engineer to go work outside of the university. But someone that's actually working for the university, I think that this is a pretty close description of what my vision is. And in fact, that was a job title that HR actually allowed us to use for the people we hired. So I think that's another sort of motivation there. Okay, so since people want to know, let's talk about the Alto University story and how we got here. And by the way, so I'm presenting directly from HackMD here. So anyone who would like to ask questions at any time, just write it directly into it. And I'll answer live. So yeah, please do that. The more questions, the easier this will be. So the Alto story, what's the background? So in the beginning, there was a group called Science IT, which I was part of. And its main task was doing high performance computing stuff. So the typical people that maintain a computer cluster. This group is not part of the central IT services anyhow, but is organized at a school level. So basically under control of the dean and a steering group made up of professors and researchers from the users, which is quite important for doing useful things. So after you have the HPC part, you need some other things. So you need teaching. So the Science IT group did teaching to support use of the cluster and a few other related skills, but mostly cluster related. Then as part of the cluster also, there's daily support. So this began with a garage session, which somehow became the word we used for a weekly help session where people could come by and ask any questions to us. So it basically ran once a week in some room prior to the Corona time. So through all of these, we start to recognize the difficulties that people have in their work. So yeah, like you see people who come in and they might have difficulties in installing software or difficulties in, well, making the scripts to run things or understanding error messages or, you know, just dealing with all the different code that they're writing. And over time, we tried to make the cluster more accessible to more people. So I put a lot of work into things like making tutorials and just sort of rephrasing the documentation in a way that's not like, okay, if you have the hardest problems, you can come and that you can use the cluster, but the cluster and our tools are usable by everyone and should be usable by everyone. And this involved also, for example, things like Jupyter Hub and so on. Okay, so then I noticed something. Basically, the amount of support we were giving had to go up. So basically, we had people that had different, oftentimes weaker in the Linux and HPC side, although of course stronger in other things. And this was a bit of a problem. Like at one point, I even thought, okay, like what have we done here? Have we just sort of given ourselves a crush load in supporting all of these different people who are coming in? So that became something I was thinking about. So at one point, I got some external funding to make this project hands-on scientific computing, which was sort of a map of all the different skills. Okay, so now we're in the year 2019 or so. Yeah, I guess 2019. And as part of that, I went around and started asking people a question. This is about the time I invented the question, what do you know now that you wish someone had told you when you started your career? And well, very interesting things came up. So basically all of the different kinds of skills that we would be taking for granted, like Linux scripting, programming, I mean, not programming, because programming is something that everyone learns, but all the tools that go around it, version control, releasing things, sharing things, and so on. I mean, these are things that people would say are quite important, but they'd never been taught. And it was holding people back. So basically now we're at the point of 2019 and realizing that there's some sort of fundamental, how would you say it? Well, we need to fundamentally rethink the way we support people. So it's no longer enough to expect people to figure out things themselves, but you need to like, well, make it more like a mentoring relationship than a teaching relationship. So incidentally, it was sometime in 2018 that despite having worked with Code Refinery people for a few years, or maybe about a year, I fully understood this idea of what a research software engineer is, and I somehow connected these issues. So the initial idea was to hire people who are finishing their PhD, train them in all of these skills. Basically, it's like a postdoc or something like that. And then they go and they support other people while building their own skills. And then they're ready to go off to companies or industry or things like that. Which even itself, I think, is still a pretty compelling argument. So, how would you say this? So, yeah, because I think I found many people who sort of know they don't want to continue the academic track, but because of the single-minded focus in academics of theory and publishing papers, they aren't able to apply their skills in a company's context. Or actually, it's more like they don't know that they even can. They don't know some of these basic other related concepts that a lot of them even communicate in interviews with companies. So I was trying to put these two different ideas together. So basically training PhDs for working life and at the same time supporting other researchers in these missing skills. Okay. So now building things up. So because of all this background, I started framing it in a certain way. So it wasn't framed in terms of we need to support people to write better software or to do better research or whatever. That didn't get traction for different ways that I think I had written down later. Did I say them before? Maybe I'll discuss that now a little bit. But anyway, so frame this in terms of diversity. So people have these different backgrounds, and unless we have this kind of close support, people whose background are slightly different will be at a disadvantage. And that's here I have a talk called Support Services versus Diversity. Yeah, I think that's the title. And I'd recommend you read or watch that. I think many of you here have already seen that. And that sort of lays out the case of why, well, basically why not investing in people like RSEs will only make the diversity crisis in computational sciences even worse. Okay. So I talked to the dean of the School of Science, and the dean says basically, oh yeah, that's a very good point. I understand. So yeah, like please go keep developing this and let's see what we can do. After a bit more work, we get a go ahead if we can get 3 departments to co-fund us. And those departments were the departments of computer science, neuroscience, and biomedical engineering and applied physics. These were already the core departments of the science IT group. So really there's no surprise in why these came on board. Like they were basically already the people that had the most computing needs, so used the cluster the most. So that really shows that this was a sort of a natural outgrowth of the science IT team. This isn't exactly a new group, which I think turns out to be important. So what kind of resistance did we get? So do I want to take a poll of which of these departments was the most resistant? Maybe there's too few people to make that interesting. But anyway, it turned out that computer science was the most resistant. Basically, the idea being, well, here people know how to program. People already know everything, so there won't be any need for that here. Well, what do you know? Guess which of the departments is one of the heaviest users of the RSE service? Basically, computer science. And why is that? So all of the things which I've been mentioning above. So, I mean, the idea of a computer scientist, what really is that these days? Is it a programmer? Is it a software engineer? Is it a data scientist? Is it someone that studied physics and then now is studying complex systems or machine learning, something like that? Some key quotes. Well, there were multiple people who basically said, go to other departments. Everyone here already knows everything. Some people blamed it on the students, saying if a student isn't an expert in everything about software, then maybe they're a bad student. Which I think, to me, these really show the importance of framing this as the diversity aspect, because these were the same people who are basically, how do you say this? Who are benefiting by the system that leaves some people behind. Okay, and then in late 2020, or I guess at this time it was early 2020. No, yeah, early 2020. Late 2019, early 2020. We got the departments on board, so we could begin it for real. It's like start hiring and all. And then remote work hit. So at first people thought remote work might be a little bit bad, but this is sort of a digression, but it turned out remote work was, in my opinion, one of the best things that happened to the RSE service and to the science IT team in general. So before we were scattered among many different buildings, we would talk by chat sometimes, but for the most part, like we might have lunches sometimes, we would have meetings once a week, the garage once a week, but we were quite spread out and split. But suddenly when we went remote, then we were all equally close together, and we could seamlessly work with each other no matter what building we were assigned to. So it was just as easy to screen share. It was actually easier to talk to someone and start a screen share and look at something than it would be to walk across our huge offices where you could see someone else's computer screen and then comment of what's going on. And well, I have a whole other talk on this topic I would like to give sometime about how we did remote work and how we made it so productive, and why I think normal is not the thing to aspire to. I think there's some very heavy context dependent things here. Like, for example, we were a team that actually worked together. Like the only thing that held us together wasn't going to lunch together, but actually having these major projects to work on where we need to communicate. Okay, but that's for another time. So where are we now? So how does the group work? Well, I guess this is sort of left out a little bit, but it's sort of a bit uninteresting. We made some job advertisements, we interviewed people, we hired them, and began working in, let's see, I guess it was October 2020. And yeah, and quickly settled into the ways of working. So there's initial contact by any means possible. So many of these projects come from the daily garage, where someone comes in for a small problem and it turns out there's a big problem. As someone on my team said, a good metaphor is you call a plumber because you have a leaky sink, and then they take a look and they say, yeah, like maybe I can fix the sink right now, but the real problem is all your pipes are rusted and it's going to fall down. Like the whole thing's going to break anytime. And you don't need someone that patches it up so you can do something small right now. You need someone who's going to really get in there and help you replace all of the pipes, which is a sort of good metaphor. Let's get back to that later. Many of the issues come from personal reference from other people on the science IT team working with other users. There's a web form or equivalently email where people can send a message and then we get started. Right now the general pattern is for the new contacts, I'll try to set up an initial meeting and figure out the basic ideas of what's going on, what they're doing, how much time it might take. And then we put everything into GitLab, which is what is used for tracking all of the issues. So we have lots of labels, a project board, a Python script to extract data out of the issues for reports and stuff like that. There's not really strict assignments of who does what right now. So sort of when someone has time, they look at the issue tracker and grab whatever comes next. I mean, there is, I guess, a bit more coordination than that. So we do have a weekly meeting where we sort of discuss things on a high level and sort of figure out who will do what. I guess the other people in the meeting can comment more on that during the discussion time or now if they want. Yes. So many of these issues come from, well, at least at the beginning, many of the issues came from Triton support issues, Triton being our HPC cluster. So a pretty typical example is that someone requests help installing some software and then we end up spending days trying to get it to install before asking, okay, what's actually going on here? And we learned that the software was written by someone at Alto who's now gone, and someone else is trying to use it again, but it's too old to work, so it's better to just fix the software itself. And these tend to be, well, at least many of them tend to be a lot faster to fix the software than to try to get the old software to install, with many other benefits from fixing up the software. There's both, or actually maybe this is not correct. Time division isn't the right word. So one person will be working on multiple projects at once. So I get the idea some RSE groups might work by having these long projects that like take, say, several months, and then all the time is scheduled. So, okay, now for these 3 months, I will be working on this one project, and then I'll go to this other project, and so on. Instead, it's more like one person is juggling several projects at once. Like there might be one primary project that's taking up most of the time, but it's, well, usually mixing several together, including support in our daily garage. Okay. We have enough projects that we have not been running out of work since the beginning, basically. And we also haven't been doing too much advertising. So for a while, there's been an issue on my plate saying, please advertise the RSE service more. But I'm sort of worried about that because if we had too many more customers, then we wouldn't have enough time to solve all of the issues, which is both good and bad. So it's good that we have enough work, but without advertising, we risk supporting the people who are already the most advanced users and not the users who can benefit from us the most. This concept is seen in my support services versus diversity talk. Okay, what's in the future? So we already have some funding to expand beyond our initial school, which was the School of Science. So the School of Science has 6 departments in it, and there's 6 total schools at the university. So for the first years since the school, since only people inside the school were funding the service, we could only support people in the school. We actually have some major funding from one big AI project, which is allowing us to hire a 3rd RSE dedicated to AI related tasks, although not really dedicated. So the idea is we still all work together and everyone can use the best skills for any project, but they get at least one person's worth of time. So that hiring is going on. One standard thing that's been under debate is how to get more project funding. So that's also here under other notes. But the long-term goal is that we can recover more of our funding from individual research projects instead of being supported with the basic funding. So what are these other notes? So yeah, the school guarantees the basic funding so we can hire people permanently, which was important because HR basically didn't allow us to do my initial idea of hiring people as basically postdocs to support others and then training them for the rest of their life. Yes. So project funding. So right now, the basic idea is if a project will last more than 1 month, then we would expect the project to contribute funding past the 1 month time. Otherwise, for anything smarter or anything smaller, it can be done using the basic funding from the schools, so the researchers don't have to worry about the payment matters or anything like that, which, as you might see from some other talks, is really important for this widespread support idea. So if the basic idea goes, if to do a small project, you need to pay a small amount of money, that's still a large amount of overhead. So in effect, we're excluding most of the possible users of our service. To external funders, like if you're being if you have a project paid by the Academy of Finland or EU or something like that, there's no difference between paying a PhD student or postdoc or whatever for your project versus paying the RSE salary. So to the external funders, you don't even need to specify that this is a RSE that you're hiring. You say you hire someone and you can pay us later. But the difficulty comes up when the financial services don't like these microtransactions. So basically they don't want to pay for, they don't want to go through all the paperwork to pay for an RSE salary for 2 weeks of work from one particular EU project, for example. And that's been one of the big barriers over time. But I think we have this basic agreement that the 1 month is the standard, and things less than 1 month are free, and greater than 1 month, finance doesn't mind dealing with the transactions for it. We can actually send invoices to different people. If you're outside of Alto, there's huge overheads to the point where you probably wouldn't want to actually do it. Also, there's concerns about whatever EU rule there is about public funding to support private undertakings. So basically, we have to add in even more overheads and do more bookkeeping to ensure that the government funding is not subsidizing outside people, even if they're universities or things like that. That's a whole other thing to talk about. Let's not even get into it right now. We cannot send invoices to grants inside of the university. So basically, we can't send an invoice to an EU grant. So it has to come from, it has to be done as salary, which is much more admin overhead. So what does this mean in effect? So this cross-organization collaboration is a big problem. There have been multiple times that a group has said, oh yeah, like my research project has money. We would like to pay you for RSE time. Let's set it up. Oh, by the way, the funding is at the University of Helsinki side. And then it's like, okay, well, we can't send them an invoice because the grant won't accept it. We can't use that money to pay our salary because our RSEs are not an employee of University of Helsinki. We can't tell someone with a permanent contract, okay, we're not paying you this month, go get employed by the University of Helsinki to do this project. I mean, that works when you're a researcher and you basically accept anything, but not for full-time professional staff. And that's something that I think I'd like to think a little bit more about. Maybe it can be a post discussion here. Okay, now we get to the discussion side of things. So, yeah. How should we do this? Well, first is some things that I'll mention. So how do we relate to other service units? And now, like, really feel free to start like putting in your own bullet points how you think this might work at your institutions. What if you think it's good or bad, whatever. So Science IT, our parent group, we're basically a core part of them. So there's no real difference between the RSEs and the other people that are maintaining the cluster in terms of, well, what we have access to. I mean, there are some difference, like the RSEs aren't sysadmins on the cluster, and the HPC people don't come to some of the RSE meetings. But we try to keep this really tight knit because like so many of our projects are closely connected to infrastructure. So having this two-way communication is really important there. The university-wide IT services is a completely separate group. They're huge. They basically, as their, I don't know if it's written or unwritten policy, they don't do any development of anything. So they basically buy stuff from other people and then support others in using what they bought. And interestingly, that can make them seem like they're advertising, like their work is advertising the services of other companies. For example, these days they advertise Microsoft stuff a lot, which is a bit annoying and not really useful to the kind of people we support. They do have an IT services for research team, and we're working more and more with them. So there might be some things like they can set up a cloud service, and then we support the users in building a service that runs on that cloud service. Or for example, they get a request and can forward it to us, and then we do the work on that request. We're trying to make this work a little bit better back and forth. So there's a whole unit at the university called research services, which is sort of like the complement of IT services. So these people include things like grant writers, legal services, but also things like the data management people, or let's see. So grant writers are the people who help administering grants after they come in. So since all of the open science people are in research services, not most, but all, that sort of gives us a good connection to them because they want to promote open science, but when it comes to actually implementing things openly, well, that's where we come in. We can actually do that. We can help make code open. We can help make data open if it requires processing, and so on and so on. There's other technical services groups in other schools. And their roles vary a lot. Like it might be, for example, laboratory managers in the School of Chemical Engineering, or process engineers in the School of Engineering, and things like that. Science IT is technical services. So I guess that shows why we're in quite close spirit. But for the most part, they don't deal with computational stuff. That's us. This goes back to the idea of research engineer. Then there's the educational technology team. Yeah. So this is something in the Department of Computer Science, and someone here had a really good point. So I was talking to them about how can we support education. So things like if a teacher has algorithms and they need to implement it in Jupyter in a way that can be auto-graded, who would support them? So is it the learning services? So as someone there pointed out, so actually what you need is someone that has a little bit of pedagogical knowledge, but also a lot of technical knowledge to do things. And that's something that's missing from all the other service units, or most of the other service units. Yeah. So what's the moral of the story? So basically by reaching out to these other service units, we can find a lot of other customers for what we do. Okay. So now this is the last section that is before the discussion. So what's the point of RSE and specialist services in general? So it's not just knowing what to do. So you can find plenty of people and websites that say, here is what you should do with your data, with your software, and so on. But if someone has not been trained to do this in their academic degree program, then they're not going to have much luck, really. And that's why you need someone to go sit there with them, do it together, and then they've learned for the next time. I found many things like researchers already know how to do their work. So we need to carefully carve out our place here. So that way we're avoiding that criticism of what we're doing. So we're basically making the research better in the ways that it's not right now. And that connects to open science. So when the work doesn't have the full benefit from it. And then there's the diversity aspect, which I guess I need to add here. Yeah, okay. So that's basically the way that we were able to motivate specialist services in universities. So now we have these questions for discussion. So what if we took a short pause and we have people go and put your own opinions here? And then we can discuss. So for example, what's the difference between a research software engineer and someone in the existing IT services or someone in these research services? Should they be treated the same? Should they be treated differently? I mean, if it's given that research services will have, say, 100 people supporting all the different research going on in the university, how many RSEs should there be? So related to this point here, research engineers specialize services for specific research problems. Well, I guess software is in parentheses there. So yeah, like, I guess that's basically saying like how, like the RSE is in a certain domain. The research engineer is in a certain domain and can do like use any tool that's available in that domain in order to solve a problem and make research better. And RSE does that with computational work. Does that sort of make sense?
So I suppose it's easier to say in words what I mean than trying to express it in writing, and then I can try again. I mean more that the scale of the service is very different. So as an RSE, I talk with different research groups and I talk directly with the researchers before implementing a solution to their specific problem that may or may not at some point be used in a different to help another researcher, but it's essentially provided for one researcher or one research group.
Right.
And I see most of these services provided as service staff by service staff. I see the difference mainly being that they are aimed at a lot of people at the same time. So it's one email service or one operating system for a staff laptop, or one set of roads at the campus that everybody walks on.
So like the RSE concept is more like individual consulting or something like that, rather than a service desk or something like that. Yeah. And then that gets to the issue, if you're doing individual consulting, who should be paying for it? So is it something that should be funded by the, like, centrally, or do you expect the projects to fund it themselves? And I think our balance is relatively good here. Like, there has to be some threshold where short things are funded centrally and larger things get funded by a project. Oh.
I mean, I suppose, of course, before the RSE concept, these would be funded by taking time from one postdoc. So it would be kind of micro-funded, but in practice, that's complicated.
Yeah, I really like this one here. So this was one of the feedbacks from someone when I was getting motivation for the RSE service. So basically people said, there was one professor I talked to and their idea was, you know, this would actually be really good for the societal impact kind of thing. So people will go and make some tool or some nice visualization, and it should be more than just a static plot in a figure. Things like making websites which will make the tool or visualization interactive to anyone in the world. So I really like that idea. I mean, imagine if any researcher could come to us and say, I've done this cool project. Can you make a interactive website for it? I mean, of course, it would have to be something beyond what you would hire a web developer to do, because if it's just something really basic, just hire a web developer. You don't need the research side. But like, I would imagine there's some middle ground where it actually requires packaging up the tool well enough. Okay.
Yeah, the second part of your sentence was essentially what I wanted to say. That I think the RSE is kind of in between. Someone produces a small tool, but that tool has very crude interactions or very crude interfaces. And RSE can make that into something that is more easily being used by a web developer, and potentially also more easily used by other researchers so that they can use their data with the tool.
Yeah, and I guess it could even be as simple, I don't know if we should say simple, as the RSE makes the tool, gives the tool a better interface, and then you can get some other web developer to do the web part of it. Yeah. Oh, there was something, this comment about the line is, in more computational fields, the line is more blurry. So yeah, it is more blurry. And I think this goes to the diversity aspect. So we really need to make some sort of argument, like, can someone jump into a computational field without having been to a computational undergrad program? Like, do we expect someone to be able to do that? And if not, we have this system where it's easier for people to jump from computation to something else than from something else into a computational field. And then when you throw in some demographics into there, you might end up with the imbalance we have here. Or at least this is one thing I noticed and someone else also thought of. Like, you know, the people, go ahead.
I kind of have the opposite impression, actually. When looking into my career, most people on the professor level, for example, they did whatever other thing and started programming in addition to it. The programming level might not be that hard, that advanced, but they are doing a fair job in implementing implementing tools for their community, or coding their models and so on. So it's more the software engineering side that is coming in, not necessarily the programming side.
Yeah. But also then here, like if you're learning programming on the side, that means you need really good informal networks to do that. So basically, if you don't have some friends you work with or whatever, that becomes harder. Like harder to have the confidence to do this and so on. So yeah, like, okay, I agree that many people doing computational work come from something else and learn programming on the side. And we can even argue that that's the best way to learn programming, this and that. But let's see. But there was some really good quotes someone made before. So when you expect people to learn things informally, that means there's an outsized effect of who your informal network is. And you end up with these like the demographic imbalances that we see now. Okay.
I think the imbalance comes by those people who learned in programming more on the side are often not that interested in the research in the software engineering side. So we don't get those people as we don't see them in applications potentially, because it's just a different. They are researchers. People who learn that on the side, they are on the researcher side, and not the research software engineer side, kind of. I think.
Yeah. I think we should go on and we can always discuss more if needed, but these are all good points. Okay. Users should know and support staff should know. Yeah, in this case, I meant users equals researcher. So, so I guess here it's a matter of defining the general knowledge properly. Like the general knowledge is the way that you share things or something like that. Like we might have very specialized knowledge in packaging and releasing software, but that's still generally applicable to many different domains. But anyway, I think somehow like this question needs to be motivated in the material when we're talking to the RSE program funders. Maybe not explicitly, but we need to be prepared to answer that. Okay, this is a good question. So this is basically saying that the people you learn informally from the people you work with, so you need to work with people from different fields. So basically, it's like saying diversity is good among skills. And you shouldn't take one group of people and put them in an office and then they only work together. Who would have thought? I guess this is all about how you define fields. Like, I'm sure the people in IT services and the research services are very specialized in what they do. It's just different than what the RSE group does. Okay, how to run online events. That's a good point. Should they be allowed to? Well, I mean, let's look at a researcher before, like a academic track researcher. You might be paid for a very short amount of time, but then you're basically always working more hours than HR. You're working more hours than you're allowed to tell HR you're working to be doing all of these other things. So as far as that's concerned, then yeah, like we should support them in doing whatever they want. We should also support research otherwise. So like, for example, in the teaching career track, the lecturers at our university have some amount of time that they're allowed and expected to devote to their own research. But these kinds of questions basically depend on what the funder wants. So if the school says we support research during the 7.25 hours per day we pay, then yeah. If they're like, no, then it becomes a side project. Co-funding with research group is an interesting idea that would allow more research to happen in addition to assisting others. But as someone once said, it's really difficult to have someone that's half in central services and half doing their own research and have it actually be divided one way or the other. So I think far too often it ends up becoming the central money supporting a single project, unless we get into all kinds of micromanagement of stuff. I would propose one more question to the audience if this is what people have here. So my question to the audience is, how can we reduce the cross-organizational silos? So for example, if we have an RSE at Alto who's really good at some topic, and the RSE group in, let's say, University of Tampere in Finland needs the skill, then how can we support them? So the easy way is to say, okay, we just support them and then they'll support us sometime later for free. And then it all evens out in the end. So at a small level, like at the School of Science level, people are rather happy with this idea and basically accept, help whoever, we're all together. But once you get across organizations, I think once we started scaling this up too much, then we get into conflicts with different funders, and we need a better plan. Anyone have ideas about that? That's a good point, existing outside the university. So, but then who pays CSC? So in the end, that's the government paying for this as part of the basic support for science. And we could equally get a large academy project form of research infrastructure, which is for RSEs, and distribute us inside of the universities and say, our mission is to support anyone in Finland, not just our university. So I think this is more a property of the funding rather than the existing outside necessarily. Only accept funding up to a certain percentage, which comes with organizational strings. Yeah. So in some ways, that's sort of what we're doing, but at the smaller level inside of Alto. So we would probably try to avoid having one RSE be paid 100% by one project in 1 month, because then they wouldn't be able to come to our, say, our daily garages and support everyone else inside. So I guess that's the basic idea of that, but then do it at a bigger scale. But then that means you need this funder that's across the different institutions that would accept there's no organizational strings attached. Like during the pilot time, people basically say, yeah, so, you know, the School of Science, if you're helping someone outside the School of Science for a little bit, that's okay, like it's still the pilot phase. But if we were spending months and months supporting someone from the School of Electrical Engineering, then that would become another matter. So basically what I'm saying here is that I think there might be some room for this kind of countrywide research infrastructure to, well, take this money and make this, well, cross-organization thing possible. And that's in fact what I think the science IT funders are trying to do. There was something called the Finnish grid infrastructure, which became the Finnish grid and cloud infrastructure. And in the latest incarnation is being called the Finnish computing competence infrastructure. And that basically is saying it's not about the hardware, but supporting people using it, which is, well, RSE. So that's my long-term plan, so to say, or my long-term idea. Okay, well, we've been talking an hour. I guess we're out of these questions and probably people are getting tired. So should we stop and maybe have voice discussion?
Yep.
Okay.
So thank you for a very nice talk, and I guess I'll stop the recording.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.